Welcome to Face the Nation. I'm Lesley Stahl. Admiral John Poindexter said he never told President Reagan about the diversion of Iranian arms sales money to the Contras. The question is, do you believe him?
You know, the buck stops here with me. I made the decision. I was convinced that the president would, in the end, think it was a good idea.
Poindexter told of ripping up evidence that the president approved trading arms for hostages, and he was asked why it took him so long to corroborate the president's story about the diversion.
Why, before you left your assignment, you did not say to the president, Mr. President, I may get in trouble about this, but I want you to know, and you may say, that what I did, you did not authorize me to do, and I take responsibility for it, and thus not have had the agony that we've had for the last 8 months.
Well, this was a very difficult time in November. I was very tired.
The White House came out swinging at the admiral, denying the president would have approved the diversion of funds.
And the president said clearly and emphatically, had I known about it, I would have stopped it.
But Poindexter stuck to his story.
I would have expected him to say that. That's the whole idea of deniability.
Some committee members said flat out they didn't believe the admiral.
I don't think it is improper for any member of this panel to characterize that testimony as being incredible, mind-boggling, chilling.
Even Reagan supporters said they were finding it hard to defend the lies. Hyde of Illinois told of once believing President Reagan that all the Iranian arms fit into a single plane.
We're talking 1,000 tows, Hawk parts in May and 500 tows in October. And I'm told if they could ever find a plane that those could fit in, it would never fly.
Polls continue to show the public does not believe President Reagan, who at the end of the week got a little help from a friend.
Now more than ever, we need American leadership, and your president is uniquely able to give it and will give it.
Poindexter provides deniability, but is it plausible? We'll ask committee members George Mitchell of Maine and Richard Cheney of Wyoming, and we'll talk with Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. Reagan's credibility at home and abroad, an issue facing the nation.
From CBS News, Washington, Face the Nation, with CBS News National Affairs correspondent Lesley Stahl.
With us, Senator George Mitchell, Democrat of Maine, member of the Senate Select Committee on Iran, and Congressman Richard Cheney, Vice Chairman of the House Select Committee. Congressman Cheney, what we have had this week, I think, is the testimony from John Poindexter that the White House was waiting for and hoping for, his testimony that he did not tell President Reagan about the diversion. Only trouble is that most Americans don't believe that testimony. And I guess the question is because of that, is President Reagan a paralyzed president, a crippled president?
I don't think so, Lesley. I think the key element for many of us was the issue of whether or not he knew about the diversion of funds. That had been the focal point all along, and of course, in this particular instance, Admiral Poindexter offered evidence that the president had no such knowledge. I think the president is strong. He should be able to recover from this and go on to an effective 18 months.
Yeah, but I know what the testimony was, and I understand that it's central, but what does the president do when the public doesn't believe him? I mean, that's where we really are. He's got what he wanted.
They clearly don't believe him in this particular case, no question about it, but the facts support him. I mean, the truth is he did not know about it. That's what all the evidence shows. In terms of how this affects his presidency long term, though, I don't think this is that significant an issue for the American people. I think they're going to judge him his final 18 months in office on how he does managing the economy, the future of efforts to negotiate a deal with the Russians on arms control, the future of the Bork nomination, and so forth.
Senator Mitchell, we are at a sort of turning point. Yes. There is a sense that we perhaps know all we're going to know. What do we do from here as a country?
Well, I agree with Dick. The president will continue to function, although I disagree that he hasn't been seriously damaged. I think he has been seriously impaired as a result of the elections of last November and now following on this here. He will no doubt continue to function, and merely by virtue of the fact that he's president with veto power gives him enormous influence in national affairs, but I don't think the president will ever again reach the status he was in prior to last November.
But I want to ask you, both. It's a tough question in the sense that maybe there isn't an answer, but there's a sense we're being heard around the world. We're a nation that wants to find out the truth and do it very publicly, but is there a moment in time where we begin to hurt the country at large? Everyone says the president isn't going to be impeached. He stays there. Where do we go from here? I think we have to figure that out as a nation. Really.
A lot of what we're focused on, of course, Lesley, is history. I mean, these are events that happened 85 and 86. The bulk of the knowledge about them has been out there on the public record now for many months. So I really think the public sort of looked at it, made its judgment, and now is prepared to move on. The president's still stronger in the polls than Ford or Carter were during most of their presidencies.
Well, the fact is, of course, there is some damage to the nation abroad by these revelations, but we long ago decided that in a democracy, one of the prices of doing business in the open, one of the prices of vigorous competitive debate is just that, and we're still better off for it. The alternative to that is to do everything in secret, and I think no one would suggest that. So there are trade-offs in a democratic society, and the trade-off here is we do public business in public, and that's better generally for us.
All right, but have we gone too far, I guess, is my question.
No, I don't think so. I don't think we have. Our purpose is to get the truth and to lay the facts for the American people.
But it's time to end it. We've gone far enough now, another week or two, final witnesses. I think we can wrap this up in another 2 weeks.
Patrick Buchanan, who worked for the president in the White House, has an incredible piece in the Washington Post this morning in which he is recommending that President Reagan block any prosecution of Poindexter and North, and if he fails at that, he's recommending the president pardon both of them immediately. And he also says that he should, whether Congress approves or not, demand $500 million for the Contras, and if he can't get the money, he should send them weapons anyway and then challenge Congress to impeach him.
Well, Pat, I'm a big fan of Pat Buchanan. I think he's a very able guy. I don't always agree with him. I think, frankly, the notion of criminal prosecution of Colonel North or Admiral Poindexter is absurd. I don't think we ought to be in that business. I don't see any reason at this point for us to be talking about criminal prosecution of these individuals.
What if they broke the law?
Well, it's not clear that they did.
But what if they did?
Well, always what if, what if. I mean, the
Well,
point is
we've had,
well, evidence of what? I mean, it's only a crime if there's been a crime, and so far there's no evidence that there's been a crime. So I really think the notion of criminal prosecution of either man is a bad idea.
Before we get Senator Mitchell to respond, what about the pardon? Now, you were there in the White House when President Ford pardoned Richard Nixon, and that was a very unpopular move.
It was. And I would hope we never get to that point. My hope would be that, that the special counsel will, having investigated the case and looked at it, that there will be trials for neither Poindexter nor North.
Well, you didn't really answer the question, though. Are you, well, why? Do you think he should pardon them?
I think that's premature, Lesley. I think at some point he may have to consider that. He doesn't have to consider it today.
Well,
you still didn't answer, okay.
We have 3 separate branches of government, and we have deliberately insulated the judiciary in our system. I think it's wrong for American politicians to attempt to influence the judicial proceedings with respect to this or any other case. No one would tolerate politicians going around telling prosecutors to prosecute or not prosecute people in other cases. We shouldn't be doing it in this case. The independent counsel is established precisely for that purpose, to determine whether or not there's evidence of a crime sufficient to initiate a criminal proceeding. That's his decision. It's not our decision. It's no one's decision now but his. The president has no authority to block that and shouldn't be in that business. Let's see what decision the independent counsel makes before we begin to speculate on what should or should not occur.
Congressman Cheney, I know that you are a great supporter of the Reagan administration, but I feel compelled to ask you if you think what you think of a suggestion that says, let's send weapons to the Contras, even if Congress doesn't want us to, and then challenge Congress to impeach the president.
Well, I would not recommend that course of action. I'm a strong supporter of the
obviously, are you not shocked by that?
Well, Pat's no longer part of the administration. He speaks as a private citizen, a columnist, if you will, and he can recommend any course of action he wants. That is not administration policy. I think the key thing is for us to be able to sustain long-term, over time, the Reagan doctrine, the notion that the U.S. would be involved in supporting anti-communist insurgents in Central America or elsewhere. That requires public support, that requires congressional support, and the key here is an educational campaign, not defiance of the Congress.
Well, let me say that I am shocked that a man who has been a close personal advisor to 2 presidents explicitly recommends that the President of the United States directly violate the law and challenge Congress to impeach him in that event. I think that demonstrates a disregard for the entire principle of the rule of law on which our nation is based. And for the President of the United States, the highest public official in this land, to take an action that is a direct, deliberate, intentional, and knowing violation of the law, I think is inconsistent with our principles and is not democracy.
Nobody in the administration's recommended this course of action. There's no evidence the President's considering it. It's a column in the Washington Post by Pat Buchanan, who's always been outspoken and an effective advocate.
And I didn't mean to suggest the President was. It was in response to the question about Mr. Buchanan's
suggestion. I want to know if there wasn't in all of this some thinking that that's the way to proceed. I mean, isn't that sort of the kind of testimony that's come out, that there was the Boland Amendment? We have to figure out how to ignore it.
Well, I think Fawn Hall inadvertently blurted out what was the attitude of some of those involved, which is there are times when you have to go above the law. That's essentially the argument that Mr. Buchanan is making in the article, and it's one with which I'd strongly disagree.
I hope the administration learned a lesson from the Iran affair, which was their failure to include and involve Congress in important national policy matters. And it's that failure that the President's suffering from now, and that risk our ability long-term to develop the kind of support we need for public policies.
We have really almost no time, but has nothing outraged you in what you've heard in these testimonies?
I suppose I've been in town too long, Leslie, to be outraged by what I see. I clearly don't like key elements of it, but I think the outrage has been overdone. There's too much moral indignation. I think we need to keep it in perspective.
Okay. Thank you both very much, Senator Mitchell, Congressman Cheney. We will be back with an interview with British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher that we taped earlier.
Thank you. Thank you. And listen, tell Mr. C.
Mrs. Thatcher, Colonel Oliver North, when he testified at the Iran-Contra hearings, said that because of the hearings, the United States was becoming a laughingstock around the world. And he also said that our allies would be wary of helping us in the future because we were airing this so much in public. Do you get that impression, too?
The United States will never become a laughingstock. We know just how much we owe to the United States. We owed it immediately after the last war in the generosity of the Marshall Plan. We owed it during the last war as she came to liberate countries in Europe from the tyranny under which they had been. We know how much we owe to the United States. Sometimes we don't always show it. I try to. But we're very much aware of this debt. Now, I think there is a problem in the sense that once you're trying to discuss every single tiny little thing that happened, one simply has to recognize that you can't carry on the business of government unless some things are confidential. And if you damage that, then it does make it more difficult, perhaps, to talk as freely as one otherwise would.
So do you think, I know in your country you don't expose these kinds of investigations to the public, you have a law against that. Is it it is damaging us. We see these polls.
Let me put it this way. I answer questions twice a week in the House of Commons, and that's pretty searching. And it's not always the most courteous of operations or things, so I'm pretty used to it. But there are times when I'm asked about certain things when I simply will get up and say, no, that's a confidential communication between governments, and it is customary that we do not reveal these. And if we did, there wouldn't be any. Or they'll ask me about certain armaments orders, and those too are confidential. Everyone understands that. So I have to withstand this questioning. But it is part of the way in which we do our work that certain things are and must be confidential. And I think, I'll tell you who does understand that. The ordinary public understand it. They understand it very well.
Let me ask you, though, about the question of trust. I read a report in all these hearings that Mr. Poindexter, who's testifying this week, went to the man who is now your British ambassador to the United States and assured him way back that the United States was making no deals to get our hostages out on the very day that McFarlane and Oliver North were in Tehran with a plane load of weapons to trade hostages. What about trust?
You are inviting me to comment on detailed matters which are of concern to the United States and involved in these hearings. I won't do it. And it would be discourteous of me to do so. And it would be quite wrong. And you may go on asking the same question in 100 different ways, and you will still get the same answer. Still get the same answer. We can continue to conduct our friendship between ourselves and the United States, and we can continue to conduct our business.
I know you've said everybody remembers us from World War II, but we don't have that impression. We have an impression that that was 30 years ago, and it's another world now. And we get reports of polls in which our credibility has been damaged, our influence weakened.
Look, we're all part of NATO. The great alliance is NATO. We're staunch allies, so is the United States, so are we in NATO. We're dealing with things, we're dealing with leaders who understand the big issues and who are not going to be sidetracked from the big issues. The big issues are the defense of freedom, the alliance with the United States. Don't forget, it's not merely only the last war, the Marshall Plan. After President Reagan had met Mr. Gorbachev in Geneva for the first time, he came and he said, look, I would like to come and tell NATO. Everyone turned up, everyone supported him. Then he came back immediately to the United States Congress. This kind of relationship still exists. The NATO organization is in Europe. There are 330,000 American servicemen right on the frontier of freedom. We, from Britain, have 66,000 of our servicemen right on that frontier. In Germany. We're doing the same job. We're defending freedom. When the president wants to get our view of how the armaments negotiations should be conducted and what we should agree to, there's extensive consultation. It works. Yes, of course you get some irritable remarks now and then. Don't you in every family? Don't you, when you have a close family relationship, say some things which just are said just in a moment's anger and they don't mean anything more than that? That's the kind of relationship. Let me use this to say thank you to the people of the United States, this country which is the flagship of freedom. And the only thing we say is please don't, amidst all this, forget the really big issues, and the president certainly isn't, because we need the leadership of the United States, and we are returning to the concentration on the East-West, on the arms control talks. The president's been very active in helping to deal with that situation in South Korea, very active in matters in the Gulf, very active in East-West.
Okay, East-West. The Soviets, our government tells us, are dragging their feet in Geneva. We're told that the prospects for a summit between President Reagan and Mr. Gorbachev this year, which everyone was hoping for, is fading away. There is some sense that the Iran-Contra hearings have given the Soviets an impression that Mr. Reagan is weakened, and they're trying to take advantage of that. Why do you think these talks have turned sour?
But I don't think they have turned sour. These issues are very complicated. You can get a general outline agreement, namely that, yes, we all agree that the intermediate nuclear weapon should go, but even that's not absolutely complete, because we'd like them to go worldwide. The Soviets said, no, they want to keep 100, and the United States keep 100. That gives you enormous problems of how to verify that there are only 100 being kept and the others are being destroyed. If you're going to get the first arms reduction agreement, you've got to make certain that it will stick and that you can check it at every single stage. You've got to get it right.
Mr. Shevardnadze was expected to come here this week to iron out those details. He is not coming. The American government has put out the word very forcefully that they are dragging their feet. It doesn't seem to be final details. It seems that the Soviets are trying to stall on us.
I think you're probably getting a certain amount of brinkmanship. You do in many, many negotiations. I think the Soviet Union wants an agreement, and I think the United States would like an agreement. But you've got to have an agreement that is sure in your defense and which does not jeopardize your defense. You've got to get it right, and you've got to be able to check it at every single point. So don't be pessimistic. I believe it will come about, but I want it right.
What did you tell the president? Did you give him any advice on how to get this back on track?
I said what I told the president when I gave a statement outside. America is the flagship of liberty. These negotiations are extremely important. We've got to get them right. Get it right. Don't go for a quick settlement. Get it right.
Mrs. Thatcher, the British press wrote before you came here
that you were coming to bolster the president, to help improve his image and to buck him up, improve his spirits. You know, I must say, from all the interviews you've been giving, that they seem to have been right. Is that why you came and what you're hoping to do?
This is the beginning of my third term. That is something an American president doesn't have. I have. I'm very fortunate. And of course, after I had been immediately to the European Council in Europe, I come to our greatest ally, the United States. I come because there are big issues to discuss, and I come because I think Britain has a contribution to make. But I come as a staunch ally and a loyal friend at all times. Yes, that's why I came, because I want to make a contribution, and I want to demonstrate our alliance and our friendship.
Are you saddened at all by what has happened?
No, I think you're taking far too downbeat a view. Now, why are all you media taking a downbeat view? Cheer up. America's a strong country with a great present, a great people, and a great future.
Lighten up. Is that what you're telling us?
Cheer up. Be more upbeat.
Well, I must say, I mean, that you are being a cheerleader about it, but we do hear that our influence has been greatly damaged. We hear that our credibility's been shredded. We hear that we have to take extraordinary steps to prove ourselves to the moderate Arab states. We have to reflag ships.
But why are you doing your level best to put the worst foot forward? Why? America is a great country. She's a strong economy. She's a remarkably strong economy. She's a people who are enterprising, self-reliant. Even during this difficult period, and it must have been a difficult period, the president's handled the South Korea matter. For the first time in Security Council, the 5 permanent members are getting together to try to bring about a ceasefire in Iran, Iraq. We're talking about possible initiatives in the Middle East. He's taken a tremendous initiative in GATT on a great problem at the moment about agricultural surpluses. This isn't a story of a person who's being deflected by one particular problem from dealing with the great matters which affect the world. We have trade problems going on, and we have a great deal to say about that. We want the world opened up to trade. This business is continuing. I beg of you, you should have as much faith in America as I have.
Did you talk to the president that way? Did you tell him to lighten up?
No, we talked about the issues, the great issues.
Was he down?
Well, the president's fine. The president's fine. He's president of the United States.
Is he in a good mood?
Yes.
Okay, we have run out of time.
Aren't you pleased?
I am pleased.
Delighted.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Margaret Thatcher. We'll be back with a final word. Our cartoon by Don Wright of the Miami News is about George Washington and the cherry tree. I cannot tell a lie. Bill Casey made me do it. I'm Lesley Stahl. Have a good week.
Face the Nation with National Affairs correspondent Lesley Stahl was produced by CBS News, which is solely responsible for the selection of today's guests and topics. This broadcast originated in Washington, D.C.